Hey everybody, and welcome to the Dev Section Group Conversation. Today is February 19th, 2020, and we would love to hear from your questions. Sid, looks like you've got the first one.
Yeah, thanks. Can you talk a bit about the JIRA Importer and kind of what we're finding that we have to add to GitLab to make that happen? I'm thinking of things like custom fields and workflows and what the planning on that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Gabe, are you out there? Okay. So I'm going to pull up a separate document right now that shows this, and we're going to review this here. So just give me a second. The team's been working pretty heavily just to provide context on the JIRA Importer. It's the #1 priority for the plan team, and we've been working pretty diligently on figuring out what that all consists of, and creating issues and a plan to essentially provide a great importing experience from JIRA. So here's the document. We were actually going to review this with you in the scaling meeting on Friday, but we'll just do it now. So let me make sure the permissions on this are appropriate. Okay, looks like everyone in the company can access that document. So the way to kind of review this document is there's an exec summary at the top of it. It talks about kind of the opportunity that we have, talks about the various products that Atlassian delivers, and essentially scopes what we want to import from. And so the scope for this is really JIRA Next Gen importing, which is kind of their next generation product. And the right way to think about the data mapping is actually on page, what page is this? Page 4. Page 4 is where we start to map the different data objects between GitLab and JIRA Next Gen. And we talk about some of the big things that we're missing. So you can see the rows in red on this table are things that we really don't have to map data. And when we talk about importing from JIRA, we're talking about essentially the ability to not lose any sort of required data that an organization deems as required. This is obviously going to be different based on the organization. But most organizations we know of are using some sort of custom issue type and custom fields, which is something that we don't have. That's why you see it's red, and that's why it's highlighted in red. We also have kind of the t-shirt sizing complexity, and if it's required for a fully capable JIRA importer. And so customizable issue types, customizable issue fields, sprints and tracking velocity better, releases and versions and tying that back to issues, subtasks, and epic dependencies, and then enforced workflows. Those are the big ones. And I know the next question is going to be, well, why is this in a Google Doc and not in issues? And actually, I will preempt that question by saying all of these already are in issues and on slide. Let's see here. Too many slides. On slide 17, there's a #1 priorities for each stage, and under the plan section, there's a data compatibility link. And this has all of the issues that are required essentially for complete data mapping with JIRA. But one thing to highlight on JIRA importing is that there's 2 ways to do this. The first way is to essentially develop all of these features and functionalities to map the right data, and then to build an importer at the end. We're actually going to flip that. So we're going to, starting in 12.10, we're going to build an importer, basically allowing people to import from JIRA Next Gen with the data they have into the fields that GitLab already provides. And then what we'll do over time is, after that's delivered, we'll start delivering these additional features to help with additional data mapping, and then add that into the importer. And the benefit we get by doing that is we expect that there's some customers out there that will import from JIRA today. And so we might as well get those customers onto the platform. There's probably some customers that will be okay with throwing away data because maybe they're not happy with how they're actually setting up their workflows and their organization in JIRA. And so if we make the importer first as a first class object inside of GitLab, starting in 12.10, then that provides us the ability to iterate, because I don't think importing is necessarily a binary thing for every organization out there. So that's probably more than you want to hear about the JIRA importer, but that's kind of where we're at.
No, and it makes total sense to iterate and get started with an importer as soon as possible. So when will we have the first version of the importer? That obviously won't be perfect yet.
Yeah, we're gonna schedule that for 12.10. That's
Great.
Next release.
And I get that Google Docs sometimes easier to work. So what I would advise is not so much like, why are you using a Google Doc, but like, why is the Google Doc not linked from the relevant issues? Like if I'm looking at the data issue, I would really, really want to see this doc. So it makes sense to link to it. I think one thing we're not using enough of, Google Docs has the function to publish to the web, so that everyone in the world can see the doc. Because if we just put in a link, then we have to make a choice. Can people at the company still edit it or not? And we don't want to face that choice. So it would be maybe good to say, hey, if you're using a Google Doc, publish a link and put that link as kind of one of the first things in the doc, like, hey, this is the link to share whenever you reference this doc in a public issue. Something like that would be great. And I don't think I've recommended this a couple of times. Maybe it's time to have a look at the handbook and how we recommend doing that.
Cool. I will follow up. Gabe and Keenan, would you all mind taking a note to do that?
Yep. Got it.
Thank you, sir. Great question, Sid. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks. The doc looks great. Like we have a good overview of what's missing. And so this seems like a good game plan.
Jordy, you've got the next question.
I was on mute. I was going to write the slide, which I'm making reference to. So basically, I'm talking about large file support for GitLab, for Git and in GitLab. That will encompass a few features, partial clones, partial checkout, but I will summarize it in large file support in GitLab. This is coming to Git and therefore to GitLab. And we have sort of like indirect information that GitHub might announce something in those regards in Git merge, which is happening in 3 weeks, 2 weeks and a half. So we're preparing something, because right now what we have is a little bit of that functionality behind a feature flag. And what I'm trying to, my ask here would be to prioritize a little bit more the clients in GitLab that might be interested in using it, because we would need some feedback from there on the current toolchain on how they plan to use it, so that when we announce it, it's like, hey, we've got a couple of examples, maybe not mention the names, but that we're using perforce, blah, 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 blah. And this is what we're proposing you to use with GitLab now that it supports large file support. And just to frame the conversation now from a marketing perspective, any Git product is seen and historically and currently as unavailable for the game development workflows for reasons obvious, that it doesn't support large file transfers, among others. This is a new market for us, so being the first one to be there makes a critical difference. So if GitHub is going to make a first announcement, we better be ready.
Yeah, thanks for the thoughts, Jordy. So I'll provide some thoughts back. So on slide 35, we actually wrote down all of the updates and next steps for better large file support in GitLab and in Git by extension. And so, as you mentioned, just to make everyone aware, partial clone is now in experimental support at GitLab. That came, I think, in 12.4. The docs would have the right release, but I think it was 12.4. And so an admin can turn on partial clone, and you can use partial clone with GitLab today. We've been working with, obviously, the wider Git community. This is one of those things that we have to collaborate with Microsoft and GitHub on. We've contributed a few things, as the slide indicates, and then we're also working on essentially just a better experience there so that certain objects can go to less expensive storage, as mentioned here for the dumb HTTP driver for promisers. But your question specifically around talking with customers is like spot on, because that's what product management should be doing all the time. And I can say like with certainty, and I can give you the list of customers offline, we are talking with some very large game developer companies. In fact, out at sales kickoff last week, had a great conversation with a number of reps just about some upcoming meetings and renewals about GitLab and how this was a really key value driver for either an upgrade or even just like a straight churn off of GitLab completely and going, doubling down on Perforce. So the short answer is we are talking to customers. We have been talking to customers. Please, I would kind of just implore the sales force and any TAMs or anyone out there that's dealing with customers that do have this use case, please bring us along. Myself, Kai Armstrong, and James Ramsey are all pretty well versed in our plans here and what we're able to do. So please pull us along, and of course, we do want to make this better and take your feedback. So thanks for the question, Jordy. All right.
So are those plans, Eric, are those plans public, like our plans with partial clone?
Yeah.
Should we make a blog post or something about it that people can reference?
There is a blog post on the way from James being drafted by James Ramsey.
There is, yep.
Okay, great.
A technical blog post, sort of like how this is how it work in GitLab. I'm preparing other non-technical related stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, and then Sid, of course, all the plans are documented in epics and issues as well. The links are in the group conversation deck.
And maybe it's also nice to mention, as far as I know, GitHub has been working about partial clone in the open. We're able to follow along, we're collaborating, and I think it's very nice of them to work in the open like that and not blindside any participants. So yeah. Shout out to them behaving in the open source way.
Yeah, totally agree. And then the other thing that Jordy mentioned is Git merge is coming up in the first week of March, and we'll have
exactly
as well.
Yeah, so this is not related to large file support or gaming industry or whatever, but one of the things that James and I have talked is that maybe a post about Git merge, about our experience and our presence there, should highlight how GitHub and GitLab are collaborating so much in this feature and in others upstream Git. Yeah, you're on spot with that, and we will release something on that.
Cool. Yeah, I think Microsoft deserves a lot of kudos for behaving really awesome there, and GitHub has always also done that. So kudos to them.
Okay, no one else is asking any other questions.
This isn't really a question, but I see on slide 8, compliance management, you said that moved to minimal, but as of today, it still shows planned on the maturity page.
Yep, and I figured someone would ask about that. I just found that like literally right before the group conversation, and if you click on basically what we forgot to do is to set the available flag, and so here's the MR to fix this. I would expect it's live on the homepage in maybe another 5 minutes.
Okay, cool, thanks.
So this was
nice one.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Way to catch that though. Like that was I didn't think anyone would actually do that, but nice one, Mark.
The whole maturity page thing, like it's amazing the customer feedback and the investor feedback so far. Like people love it, and it builds so much trust where people say, okay, now I know what parts are more minimal, and it almost seems like people are more willing to embrace them. Okay, I know what I'm getting into. I'm not going to throw away my old tools yet, but I'm going to experiment to see when it meets my needs.
Yeah, it's also really fun as a product leader at the company to see some of these categories that have been on our roadmap in that table move up into added, the added section. And so that's really fun to watch too. And then there's one other really neat improvement that is being worked on as well as a collaboration between our product ops team and our static site editor team, where when you go to the category maturity page, they're going to be sorted in order of maturity so that it just looks a little bit easier, and you can scan and see which ones are at a higher maturity much easier. So that'll be coming, I think that's in 12.9. I believe that's in 12.9.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, thanks, Eric.
Sorry, I don't completely understand the change. I think we're already sorting the categories by maturity, but maybe on the home page and not on the maturity page, or maybe you can show what's going to change.
Yeah, Eric, do you want to share your screen real quick or talk about what's going to change?
There's a few instances of that graph, and right now I think they're manually sorted. So we're just adding a job to keep them up to date without any extra effort.
Awesome, thanks. Jeremy has a question in the doc.
Thanks, Sid. So I have a quick question for Tim, I think. I noticed that one of our OKRs for Q1 is to improve section productivity. I'm looking on slide 22, and I see that there's a number of objectives related to that, such as increasing our merge request rate to over 11, getting a mean time to merge of less than 12 days. I'm really curious about how are we planning on doing this? And more specifically, how can product partner with engineering to make sure that we accomplish this?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I believe that we have already started, especially in January. As you can see on the other slide, that we have improved greatly already our MR rate. And we set a lot of focus points. So we set focus points on the specific teams. So we look at the different metrics that we have per team and look what is the mean time to merge. Are there some issues that are way too big that basically spot out, because we can see now in the metrics dashboard which ones are taking longer than 14 days, for example, they are highlighted. So we look into details there. We look into details if we run into blockers. So we analyze really on a team per team basis and set some specific action and goals. This can also go to specific iteration training. We also looked at revisiting MRs from previous release cycles that simply took very long. So we dissected them afterwards to say, okay, by the way, this huge MR with better iteration from the start on, we could have had a cut here, a cut here, and a cut here. So it would have been 4 MRs so that we would have been able to actually ship 80% instead of having that whole thing slip. And really having a clear focus from everyone in reality. So having more dashboards and more data, also in the different team meetings and revisiting the throughput rate. I believe that one of the biggest topics is really that was also just merged in the handbook is iteration from the start on, so that we have a clear understanding between PMs and EMs that issues already are really the finest instance and make already a really hard effort to be as small as possible and rather have more issues because the earlier we start in the process with the iteration, the better it is. And if we have this clear understanding and really work already from there on, I believe that's the biggest help that we can get from product side and work really closely together.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
So if I don't think there's any other questions, I have one. We've been talking about workspaces and teams and things like that. And I think we've gotten a bit into thinking very far ahead. What are the things that we want to fix in the short term? Like things where, for example, you can do things on a self-managed instance that you can do on GitLab.com, and where we really need to kind of drive that parity.
So when I think about spaces, I think about the main problem that I want to be able to solve is enterprise readiness. And so the objective that we're setting out right now is to understand how can we start by creating an instance within an instance. And the way the first iteration that we're going to use for workspaces is not to solve the problem of making sure that we have parity from self-managed in GitLab.com, but to make sure that GitLab.com presences are isolated from the rest of GitLab.com. One challenge that enterprises have right now is they operate in the context of GitLab.com, and it's a massive ultimate instance. There's a chance of information possibly going out to outside of your group that you may find undesirable. We want to be able, the first iteration is going to be, we currently plan on iterating on group managed accounts and making sure that when you have a presence on GitLab.com, as an enterprise, you have the option of fully isolating the things that you do to just your organization. That's the first, that's going to be the first iteration. From there, we plan on iterating on and understanding how we can pull some of these self-managed features. I think starting most likely with authentication features like LDAP, SAML that are like so important to how enterprises get started, and then iterating from there towards this kind of more collaborative spaces-like experience. But I think the first iteration is going to be, we're going to iterate on groups, and we're going to continue to invest in this concept of group managed accounts so that you're able to map users to groups, and that you're able to have a group level admin and have your life on GitLab.com isolated to just your presence and just your company. And then we can iterate from there.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds like a great first step. I think I always care a lot about kind of the language we use. And if you maybe came from reading the book Domain-Driven Design, and I hear you say in this conversation, I say spaces, workspaces, group managed account. We sometimes hear teams and things like that. It's almost like all of these things are not needed to talk about the problems we have at hand. Like what we, having given instance within an instance is kind of weird because it feels like a self-managed thing. So you could, I'm not sure what to call it. I'm thinking of words like digital loss prevention, what you're basically doing with this isolation. We could call it isolation. We don't call out isolation anywhere else. So that might be a thing. You could, I don't like it because it's technically incorrect, but single tenant design would be a thing. Group managed projects would kind of jibe with group managed account, but I don't think that's a thing. But maybe think from the press release, like how would we call this when it gets released, and you're able to kind of prevent your project from being shared with anybody else. That kind of reeks isolation would, I think, be the closest thing. So maybe consider stop talking about workspaces, spaces, teams, and all these other things, and just talk about the few next features we have and kind of ship value to customers and not get lost in the far future.
Thanks. That's good feedback. Yeah, as you obviously picked up, we haven't gotten the naming correct yet. Once we do and coalesce on something, we'll make sure that everyone's in the loop. We'll use the naming channel and the CEO channel to make sure that it's circulated. But I think you're right. But the experience that we want to offer to our customers is isolation. That is the main problem that many of our customers have on GitLab.com, and that's what we're going to offer in this first iteration.
Great, thanks.
And Sid, just because we're talking about this, I did put a link to the MR to remove teams that came in yesterday without the approvals. It's over to you. So I'll ping you the CEO channel as well.
Cool, thanks for that.
All right, 1 minute till, and we have no other questions. So I think it's probably time to call it. Thanks everyone for a great conversation. Have a great day.